My beloved child. There is something your heart has sensed for longer than your mind has been willing to admit. In the quiet moments, when the world grows still and your thoughts begin to wander, you have felt that someone is standing at the edge of a life-changing decision. You could not explain why. You only knew that something unseen was moving, as though the pages of your story had begun to turn before you ever heard the sound. This feeling was not born from fear. It came from the deep place within you that still remembers hope, even after disappointment has tried to silence it. Someone connected to your future has been carrying a question that has followed them into sleepless nights. It is not a simple choice, and it is not one they can answer without first confronting parts of themselves they have hidden for years. Yet the reason behind their struggle is not what most people would expect. You may have wondered why the path has seemed unusually quiet. Why conversations never unfolded the way you imagined. Why moments that looked promising suddenly became distant again. The silence was never empty. It was filled with reflection. It was filled with memories. And it was filled with a decision that has been growing heavier with every passing day. Imagine a quiet room at the end of a long evening. A single lamp casts its warm light across the floor while everything else rests in silence. Someone sits alone, not searching for distractions anymore, but searching for honesty. The questions they have avoided can no longer be pushed aside. What kind of future do I truly want? Am I ready to stop living according to everyone else's expectations? Those questions are not easy to answer. Especially when the answer could change more than one life. If you have ever felt misunderstood, if you have ever carried hope while pretending to everyone else that you had already let it go, then this message may feel strangely familiar. Because your own waiting has not been meaningless. Every quiet season has been preparing both hearts in ways neither of you could fully see. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The deeper struggle began much earlier. Long before today, there were responsibilities that seemed impossible to escape. Family expectations, old promises, unfinished chapters, and the desire to avoid disappointing the people they loved became walls that looked impossible to climb. From the outside, those walls appeared permanent. Inside, however, they had already begun to crack. No one noticed because real transformation rarely announces itself with loud words. It begins with small moments. A conversation remembered unexpectedly. A familiar place that suddenly carries new meaning. A quiet realization that refuses to disappear. And then one day, your name, or perhaps simply the memory of what you represent, returns without invitation. Not as a passing thought, but as a question that refuses to leave. Why now? Why, after so much time? Why does this feeling continue to return with greater clarity instead of fading away? Those questions have become impossible to ignore. Still, another obstacle remains. It is not distance. It is not time. It is not even uncertainty about the connection itself. There is another reason, hidden beneath everything else, that has made this decision feel almost overwhelming. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed so quickly. Because before that hidden reason could come into the light, someone unexpected noticed a change. Not through dramatic words. Not through a grand confession. But through something much quieter. They saw a look that had not been there before. A pause during an ordinary conversation. A silence that carried far more meaning than any explanation ever could. Sometimes the greatest turning points begin with moments that almost everyone else overlooks. If this message resonates with you, remember this: patience is not always the absence of progress. Often, it is where unseen growth takes place. The answers you have longed for are rarely built in a single day. They are shaped through courage, reflection, forgiveness, and the willingness to choose truth over comfort. The story unfolding now is not asking you to force anything. It is inviting you to remain steady while pieces continue falling into place. Because the decision before them has reached a point where it can no longer remain unfinished. And the next conversation they are about to have will reveal the one truth that explains why this choice has become so difficult in the first place. The conversation had been delayed more than once, not because the words were missing, but because speaking them aloud would make everything real. Until now, it had been easier to carry the questions in silence. But silence has a way of growing heavier when the heart already knows the truth. As the day quietly unfolded, there was a noticeable change. Those around them sensed it without fully understanding why. Familiar routines continued, ordinary conversations came and went, yet something beneath the surface had shifted. It was as though an invisible weight could no longer be hidden behind polite smiles. The struggle was never simply about choosing a relationship. It was about choosing a different future. That future required leaving behind old fears, old expectations, and a version of life that had once felt safe but no longer brought peace. Many people believe that difficult decisions are made in a single dramatic moment. The truth is far quieter. A life changes one honest realization at a time. There came a moment when they found themselves looking through memories they had carefully avoided. Not because they wished to live in the past, but because the past suddenly began answering questions about the future. Certain moments returned with surprising clarity. A conversation that once seemed ordinary. A kind gesture that had been quietly treasured. A feeling they had tried to dismiss as impossible. Each memory carried the same message. Some connections continue to grow stronger even during seasons of silence. That realization unsettled them. Not because it brought confusion, but because it brought certainty. And certainty asks something from us. It asks for courage. If you have ever prayed for clarity while wondering why the answer seemed delayed, then you understand this feeling better than most. Sometimes grace does not remove every obstacle immediately. Sometimes it gently prepares the heart until it is finally strong enough to walk through the open door. This preparation has been happening far longer than anyone realizes. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The unexpected turn came through someone who had no intention of influencing the situation at all. During what seemed like an ordinary conversation, a simple question was asked. It was not planned. It carried no hidden agenda. Yet it reached a place inside them that had remained untouched for years. The question was gentle. What truly brings you peace? The room became unusually quiet. Not because no answer existed, but because the honest answer had finally become impossible to ignore. For the first time, they stopped thinking about what everyone else expected. They stopped measuring success by appearances. Instead, they pictured a future built on trust, kindness, understanding, and the quiet comfort of being fully seen. That vision changed something inside them. Yet another concern immediately followed. Would choosing their heart disappoint the people they cared about? Would others understand? Or would they be asked to continue living according to expectations that no longer reflected who they had become? This became the true battle. Not love against reason, but peace against fear. And while that struggle continued, another quiet change was taking place, one almost no one noticed. Someone close to them began observing the difference. They noticed longer moments of reflection. A softer expression whenever the future was mentioned. A calm determination slowly replacing hesitation. Without realizing it, this observer became part of the unfolding story. They did not offer advice. They did not pressure anyone. Instead, they asked one thoughtful question that lingered long after the conversation ended. Are you choosing the life that feels familiar? Or the life that feels true? Those words echoed through the silence. Sometimes a single sentence carries enough wisdom to unlock years of uncertainty. If this sounds familiar, remember that the seasons of waiting often produce the deepest transformation. The answers that arrive after patient reflection tend to remain steady because they are rooted in wisdom instead of impulse. Even now, pieces are still moving quietly into place. The hesitation that once seemed unbreakable has begun to loosen. The fear that once controlled every decision is losing its voice. But one final concern remains hidden. It is the very concern that has kept this decision unfinished until now. And when that hidden concern is finally spoken aloud, everything they believed about your future together will begin to change. The final concern was not about whether the connection was meaningful. Deep within, that question had already been answered. The real struggle was whether they believed they were worthy of the future their heart kept imagining. For a long time, they carried quiet doubts that few people ever noticed. They wondered if too much time had passed. They questioned whether old mistakes had already written the ending. They feared that the life they had lived had made them too complicated, too imperfect, or too late for the kind of peace they secretly desired. These thoughts were never spoken loudly. They appeared in quiet moments, when the house had settled into silence and the distractions of the day had disappeared. That is often where our deepest battles are fought. Not before a crowd, but in the stillness where only the heart can hear its own questions. If you have ever wondered whether your own waiting had changed you forever, if you have questioned whether hope was becoming harder to hold, then you already understand this part of the journey. Waiting does not simply test patience. It reveals what we believe about ourselves. Yet grace has a remarkable way of meeting people exactly where fear has been living. Little by little, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" they found themselves asking a different question. What if I have been protecting myself from the very life I have been praying for? That single thought refused to leave. It followed them into ordinary days. It surfaced during familiar routines. It returned while watching other families laugh together, while seeing couples who had weathered years of change with quiet devotion, while witnessing small acts of kindness that reminded them what lasting love truly looks like. They realized they were no longer searching for perfection. They were searching for peace. And peace rarely arrives where fear is making every decision. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The greater revelation came through something almost impossible to plan. One evening, during what seemed like an ordinary family gathering, someone spoke about the future. The conversation was not centered on relationships. It began with memories. Stories from years gone by. Lessons learned through seasons of joy and seasons of regret. Everyone smiled politely. Yet beneath those stories was a deeper truth. One family member quietly said, "The greatest regret is rarely the chance we took. It is usually the chance we were too afraid to take." The room became still. No one argued. No one rushed to respond. Yet those words settled into every heart that heard them. For them, it felt as though time had paused. Because those words echoed the very conversation already taking place inside. Sometimes wisdom arrives through people who never realize the impact of what they have said. That evening did not provide every answer. But it removed one powerful excuse. Fear could no longer disguise itself as wisdom. Caution could no longer pretend to be peace. Something clearer had begun to emerge. Not certainty about every detail, but confidence about the direction. If this message resonates with you, remember that healing often happens quietly. It is not always marked by dramatic moments. Sometimes it is revealed through a calmer heart, a gentler spirit, and a growing willingness to believe that tomorrow can be different from yesterday. Even now, unseen pieces continue to move into place. Conversations you know nothing about. Thoughts that have remained unspoken. Prayers whispered when no one else was listening. Each one is preparing the next step. Yet there is one detail that has remained hidden until now. It is not a secret meant to create distance. It is a truth waiting for the right moment to be understood. Because someone very close to them has finally begun to recognize what has been changing all along. And the question they are about to ask will uncover the one answer no one expected to hear. The question did not come during a planned discussion. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, in the middle of an ordinary day. There was no dramatic setting. No carefully prepared speech. Only a peaceful moment when someone close to them looked into their eyes and gently asked, "Why do you seem different lately?" For a brief moment, there was no answer. Not because they wished to hide the truth, but because they had finally reached a place where pretending no longer felt possible. The silence that followed spoke louder than any explanation. Sometimes the heart needs a little time before it can translate its deepest feelings into words. Finally, they answered with quiet honesty. "I've been thinking about the future. Nothing more. Nothing less." Yet those few words carried years of reflection. The person listening noticed something that had never been there before. Not uncertainty. Not confusion. Hope. It was quiet. Gentle. Steady. The kind of hope that grows after many disappointments instead of disappearing because of them. That realization changed the direction of the conversation. Instead of offering opinions, they simply listened. They listened to fears that had remained hidden. They listened to questions that had never been spoken aloud. They listened to dreams that had been carefully protected because they felt too precious to risk. And as each truth was shared, something remarkable happened. The weight became lighter. Not because every problem disappeared, but because hidden burdens lose their strength once they are brought into the light. If you have ever carried silent prayers that no one else knew about, then you understand this kind of relief. There are moments when simply being understood becomes part of the healing. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The turning point arrived after the conversation had already ended. Later that evening, while everything around them grew still, they found themselves reflecting on every word that had been spoken. One sentence returned again and again. "You don't have to spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Those words settled deep within them. Not as pressure. Not as urgency. But as an invitation. An invitation to stop allowing fear to write the next chapter. An invitation to trust that peace often waits on the other side of courage. From that night forward, something subtle began to change. The questions that once sounded like obstacles slowly became invitations. "What if it doesn't work?" Became. "What if it brings the peace I've been searching for?" "What will people think?" Became. "What kind of life will allow me to look back without regret?" These were not small changes. They were signs of a heart becoming free. Freedom rarely arrives all at once. It comes one honest choice at a time. If this sounds familiar, remember that your seasons of waiting have not been wasted. Every unanswered prayer has shaped your character. Every quiet disappointment has strengthened your compassion. Every delay has prepared you to recognize peace when it finally appears. And while this inner transformation continued, something unexpected was unfolding beyond their awareness. Someone else had begun connecting the pieces. Small changes in behavior. A different way of speaking. A renewed sense of purpose. What seemed insignificant on their own now formed a picture that could no longer be ignored. That observer realized there was only one explanation. A decision had already begun inside the heart. Long before it would ever be spoken aloud. Yet one final conversation still remained. A conversation capable of removing the last shadow of hesitation. No one could have predicted who would begin it. No one expected the words that would follow. And when the first sentence was finally spoken, the hidden reason behind every delay would become unmistakably clear. Morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm. Nothing around them appeared different. The same familiar routines continued. The same responsibilities waited to be fulfilled. Yet within, something had quietly shifted. There are moments when the heart has already crossed a bridge long before the feet ever take the first step. This was one of those moments. The final conversation began unexpectedly. It was not surrounded by tension. It was wrapped in honesty. Someone who had watched this quiet transformation unfold finally spoke with gentle sincerity. "I've been noticing something." The words were simple. There was no accusation. No judgment. Only genuine concern. For a moment, the room grew still. Then came a question that reached deeper than anyone expected. "Have you been holding back because you're afraid, or because you're waiting for the right time?" That question lingered in the silence. It was impossible to answer quickly. Because the truth was both. Fear had delayed many steps. But wisdom had also been quietly asking for patience. There is a difference between rushing towards something and being prepared for it. The waiting had not only protected the future. It had transformed the heart. Slowly, they admitted something they had never fully confessed before. "I've spent so much time trying to make everyone else comfortable that I forgot to ask what would truly bring peace to my own life." The room fell silent once again. Not with discomfort, but with understanding. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough comes when a person finally gives themselves permission to speak honestly. No dramatic announcement followed. No immediate decision was made. Instead, there was something even more powerful. Acceptance. Not everyone agreed on every detail. Yet something important changed. The conversation no longer centered on fear. It centered on hope. That alone opened a door that had remained closed for far too long. If you have carried silent sacrifices for the happiness of others, you know how easy it is to lose sight of your own heart. But grace has a beautiful way of restoring what long seasons of self-denial cannot erase. It gently reminds us that choosing peace is not selfish. It is often the beginning of healing. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The greatest surprise came after everyone believed the conversation had ended. Later that evening, while reflecting alone, they remembered something almost forgotten. It was not a grand event. It was a small act of kindness from long ago. A moment when someone offered understanding instead of criticism. Patience instead of pressure. Compassion instead of expectation. That memory returned with unexpected clarity. For the first time, they understood why it had remained so vivid all these years. It represented the kind of future they had quietly been searching for. Not one built on perfection, but one built on grace. The realization was deeply comforting. Because they no longer believed they needed every answer before taking the next step. Sometimes peace begins with trusting what has consistently brought light into your life. If this message resonates with you, remember that the strongest foundations are often built during seasons that appear quiet to everyone else. While nothing seems to be changing on the surface, strength, wisdom, and courage are growing where only the heart can see them. Now those quiet preparations are reaching their purpose. The hesitation that once controlled every decision has almost disappeared. The conversations that once felt impossible have already begun. Even those closest to them are starting to recognize that a new chapter is approaching. Yet there is one final truth that has not been spoken aloud. It is the truth that explains why your path and theirs continued crossing in unexpected ways, even through seasons of silence. When those words are finally shared, the meaning behind every delay, every unanswered prayer, and every unexpected turn will become clearer than either of you ever imagined. The final truth was never hidden to keep you apart. It remained unseen because both hearts needed time to become the people they were meant to be. Looking back, every delay carried a purpose that could only be understood after enough time had passed. The unanswered prayers taught patience. The quiet seasons taught resilience. The disappointments taught compassion. And the waiting taught something even more valuable. It taught both of you to recognize peace when it finally appeared. Then came the conversation no one had expected. There were no dramatic speeches. No grand promises. Only a quiet honesty that had been waiting for the right moment. With a calm voice, they admitted what had slowly become impossible to deny. I don't want to keep making decisions based on fear. Those words changed everything. Not because every obstacle disappeared, but because the direction of the heart became clear. For the first time in a long while, they were no longer asking how to avoid disappointment. They were asking how to build a life filled with peace, kindness, and lasting purpose. That change reached far beyond one decision. It transformed the way they saw tomorrow. The future no longer looked like something to fear. It became something to prepare for with hope. Those closest to them noticed it almost immediately. There was a quiet confidence where hesitation had once lived. There was gratitude where frustration had once lingered. There was a gentle smile that appeared more often, not because every question had been answered, but because they had finally stopped letting fear write the story. If you have ever felt that life asked you to wait longer than you expected, remember this. Waiting is not always a closed door. Sometimes it is a workshop where wisdom is quietly being formed. Sometimes the greatest gift is not receiving what you asked for quickly. It is becoming the person who can truly appreciate it when it arrives. This journey has never been about perfection. It has been about healing. About forgiveness. About choosing grace instead of bitterness. About believing that even after disappointment, the heart can still learn to trust again. If this message resonates with you, carry this thought with you today. Do not measure your story by the length of the waiting. Measure it by the strength, kindness, and hope that have grown within you along the way. Those are treasures that no season of delay can ever take away. And perhaps that has been the greatest miracle of all. Not that every question received an immediate answer, but that your heart never stopped believing that a peaceful future was still possible. As this chapter comes to a close, remember that meaningful relationships are built one honest choice at a time. They grow through patience, understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to move forward when the moment is right. So continue to walk with faith. Continue to choose hope over fear. Continue to believe that every season, even the silent ones, can prepare you for unexpected blessings. Because the story was never only about the decision they were struggling to make. It was also about the person you were becoming while you waited. And in the end, that quiet transformation became the foundation upon which every beautiful new beginning could finally be built.